Baldr's presence was like the hush before sunrise, not in brilliance, but in peace. Among the 9 realms, he wandered gently through a garden only he tended, nestled on the soft hills behind Breiðablik's shining walls. It was no ordinary garden, for nothing in it grew with urgency or purpose. Each petal, each stem, each glistening blade of dew-kissed grass existed only to be soft, serene, and utterly without hurry. The trees here bore leaves as pale as buttercream, translucent when touched by light, swaying like sighs in a warm breeze that never tired. Flowers curled like sleeping hands, unfolding not for bees or songbirds, but simply to bask in the presence of the god who loved them. Some glowed faintly at dusk, humming low tunes of comfort that only Baldr seemed to understand. Others pulsed in slow rhythm, like dreams made visible. No walls surrounded this space, only hedges of moonless, a pale, glowing vine that shimmered when the wind passed through, as if moonlight had woven itself into gentle tangles. The sky above remained in a constant state of late morning, that hushed golden hour before the world fully stirs, a time where light diffuses, like a warm breath, and shadows sleep long and soft upon the grass. Baldr did not rule this space. He did not command. He merely moved among the plants like mist on a meadow, his fingers brushing each bloom not to change it, but to acknowledge it. And in his wake, calm deepened. Even the stones seemed to settle more comfortably into the earth. Sometimes, small animals would approach, not to seek food or affection, but simply to share in the stillness. A silver fox once rested beside Baldr for 3 entire days, its ears twitching now and then to the rhythm of the garden's breeze. A family of swans nested by the softly trickling stream, whose waters glowed faintly with reflected peace. There was no sound of labor, no pressure of growth. Here, everything simply was. And Baldr, the god of light, not for his glare, but for his gentleness, spent his hours in soft contemplation, humming ancient lullabies that had no beginning, no ending. His voice, when it rose, felt like honeyed clouds, dissolving any trace of heaviness from the listener's heart. On occasion, others came, gods of the Aesir, travelers from the distant branches of Yggdrasil, though they never stayed long. The tranquility of Baldr's garden, while welcoming, asked for nothing but stillness. Some would linger in silent reflection, sitting on smooth stones and allowing their thoughts to wander like dandelion seeds. Others, less suited to such stillness, would smile with gratitude and return to the rhythms of their livelier halls. But Frigg, his mother, came often. She would sit beside him on a bench carved from driftwood, their silences deep and content. Together, they would watch the wind carry the seeds of a golden petaled tree, drifting like tiny lanterns into the hush beyond. Baldr sometimes spoke of dreams he had, gentle dreams of sailing ships made of petals, of skies that sang, of meadows beyond the horizon made entirely of sleep. And though these were dreams, nothing in Baldr's garden needed to be real in the way mortals understood. Everything was already enough. As twilight approached, not true night, but the drowsy hour, where colors leaned toward lavender, the garden would hum a little softer. Petals would close, leaves would hush, even the brook seemed to pause. And Baldr would lie back on a bed of moss that shaped itself to him, gazing upward not at stars, but at a sky that swirled with the light of memory and comfort. The garden never changed. Or perhaps it did, but only in the way clouds change, slowly, imperceptibly, and always toward a softer form. And so Baldr rested, and the garden dreamed with him. Together, They were not a tale of glory or motion, but one of presence, a breath that never hurried, a light that never burned. Even the wind, upon entering this space, seemed to sigh and slow, as if remembering what it meant to be at peace. Breidablik Baldr's hall stood like a breath held in silver, a place so serene that nothing unkind could enter. Its walls were spun of pale marble veined with soft gold, yet it was not the grandeur of the hall that stilled the heart, but the feeling it gave, like waking slowly into warmth, with the weight of dreams still gentle on your skin. It was said that no shadow touched Breidablik's threshold. This was not because it blazed with light, but because everything here glowed with a calm too deep for darkness. The glow came not from torches or the sun, but from the laughter that lived in its stones, the hush of song that lingered in its air. Inside, the great hearth never roared. Its fire pulsed like a quiet heart, casting ripples of golden warmth across floors smooth as river stone. The scent of cedar and wild clover curled gently in the air, carried by breezes that arrived, without ever disturbing a single candle. The ceiling shimmered with a tapestry of soft stars, changing gently with the time of day, though true night never came, only the slow turning of a golden dusk that felt like forever. Here, Baldr welcomed all who came, not with pronouncement, but with a presence so kind it softened even the firmest voice. His laughter, light and slow, would echo across the great hall and out into the meadows beyond. It was the sort of sound that loosened burdens, that made even the most serious god tilt their head and smile without knowing why. The gods came often. Odin, his father, sometimes stood in quiet corners, sipping mead from a cup carved with hummingbirds, his gaze softened, not searching. Freya arrived with pockets full of flower seeds and let them spill onto the rugs, where they sprouted and bloomed by the time she departed. Even quiet Hr, Baldr's twin, sat often by the open windows, turning wooden beads in his hand, listening. More than speaking, no one brought conflict to this place, for conflict simply unraveled when it touched the threshold. Here, old worries forgot their purpose. Rivalries curled up like sleepy cats. Stories were told, yes, of distant travels, of whispered wonders, but always in soft tones, like bedtime tales, meant to soothe more than inform. Loki, too, visited. When he did, he came not as a trickster, but as a flicker, a shifting breeze, a chuckle that fluttered through the hall without weight. He was quieter in Breidablik, as if remembering something he could not quite name. Baldr greeted him the same as all others, with a warmth so complete it left no space for mischief. Long tables bore not feasts, but gentle offerings, bread glazed with honey and rosemary, fruit so ripe it fell willingly from its skin, soft cheeses that melted like morning fog. No feasting, no cheering, only the quiet ritual of sharing, of hands passing from one to another without need for words. And music, always music, not performed, but present. A lyre left leaning against a wall might suddenly hum when the breeze touched it. Wind chimes danced overhead, tuned to the breath of the hall itself. Sometimes Baldr would hum, and the notes would drift upward, nestling among the beams like sleepy birds. Even time behaved differently within Breidablik. The hours unfolded, like soft cloth, unmarked by urgency. Day was not a boundary, but a mood, and night, when it neared, came only to deepen the gold. One day, Frigg arrived, bearing a pouch of tiny pebbles, each one kissed by a vow, silent promises she had gathered across the worlds. She laid them gently beside Baldr, who closed his hand over them with a smile, saying nothing. He understood. Without asking, they shimmered faintly, like dreams not yet spoken aloud. And though no one knew why, each visitor left Breidablik lighter than when they arrived, not because anything had changed, but because, for a while, they had remembered stillness. Outside the great hall, the wind moved as though it had listened. The grass lay still as if hushed by song, and the sky softened its color, cupping Breidablik in a glow that never faded. In the quiet space between stars and morning, Frigg walked the paths of the 9 realms, wrapped in the hush of purpose. She moved not as a queen, nor as one who commanded, but as a mother who listened. Her steps were light, but they stirred ancient. Things the stones of Alfheim, the mists of Vanaheim, the frost-sleeping woods of Jotunheim, each step a whisper, each breath a promise waiting to be heard. She gathered not artifacts or omens, but intentions, soft assurances spoken by all things that knew the gentleness of Baldr in every realm. Frigg asked a question, not with words, but with presence. Would you be kind to my son? And everything rock and river, tree and cloud responded in its own way. From the blades of meadow grass came a rustle of peace. From fire came warmth without burn. From water a murmur of stillness. Even metals, deep in the earth, folded their edges inward, agreeing to stay restful. Birds circled her with silent wings. Deer paused mid-step in her presence. The wind that once howled in distant cliffs now softened to a sigh, curving around her as if it too understood the softness she sought. To each she made a small gesture, placing her hand lightly against bark or letting her fingers trail through rain. No bargains, no demands, only the request of one whose love was deeper than language. In return, the world responded with quiet nods, glimmers, or pauses. Each being, living, growing, glowing, flowing, agreed to hold no harm toward the light that was Baldr. And so she continued, realm to realm, collecting these gentle pledges. In her satchel she carried feathers, petals, bits of polished shell, tokens of those quiet yeses, small and glowing. They were not symbols of power, but reminders that the world could be tender when asked. She even walked among the mists of Niflheim, where silence lay thick upon the land. There she did not speak, only stood for a long while beside a sleeping stone, until a trickle of warmer air rose and curled around her fingers. Even there, something yielded. Yet in all her journeying, Frigg felt not triumph, but tranquility. For this was not a mission. It was a lullaby whispered across the worlds, a song of protection sung so softly that it echoed even in places without echo. She returned to Breidablik at twilight, her cloak lined with dew and stardust. Baldr stood waiting at the threshold, his eyes calm, his expression unreadable in its stillness. She placed the satchel in his hands. He did not open it. He simply pressed it to his heart and nodded. In the sky above them, a trail of mistletoe drifted past, too high and too soft to notice. But the garden around them grew even quieter, as if it had been listening to her footsteps all along. They sat together in the garden without speaking. Above them, the light turned the color of hushed amber. Around them, no branch stirred. The very world seemed to lean in, exhaling. And in that breath, a circle closed, not tightly but loosely, like a ring of petals floating on still water. The stars above shimmered, not with fire, but with memory, as if each one held a whisper. Frigg had once a breeze drifted over the still groves of Asgard, gentle as down, and in its hush rode, Loki, not in form or stride, but as a breath, a flicker, a sigh between moments. When the gods laughed within Breidablik, a shimmer passed beneath the tables. When mead poured into crystal cups, a glint of mischief sometimes caught the eye, then disappeared. But here, in this tale, there was no mischief with teeth, only a dance of quiet riddles, wrapped in feathers and fading smiles. Loki often took the shape of a bird in these softened days, not to trick or spy, but perhaps because the wind suited him more than stone. As a raven, his wings sliced the sky without sound, his shadow never touching the ground. He was seen rarely, and even then only by those who did not seek him. Yet, wherever he passed, the world seemed to pause, not in caution, but in a peculiar curiosity, like a candle flickering for no reason. One afternoon, as Baldr wandered alone beyond the garden, he heard the faintest chime above. A feather, long and grey with edges dipped in silver, fell slowly through the golden light. He caught it gently, smiling, and tucked it into his sash. Moments later, a second feather fell, then another, and when he looked up, a raven wheeled silently overhead, tracing wide circles. Baldr did not call out, he only watched. The bird's path curved above the meadow, slow and measured, before vanishing into a copse of trees that trembled faintly, as if hiding laughter. The grove it entered was old, older than even Baldr remembered. The trunks there grew close together, their bark smooth as still water. The leaves, soft and silky, swayed with no breeze. The raven perched high among them, where mist curled like spun wool, and from its throat came no caw, only a low, musical hum, almost a lullaby, almost a secret. Loki, as raven, watched, not with malice, but with endless thought. To see Baldr was to witness ease, the kind of ease that soothed and softened everything. It touched yet something in Loki, the wanderer of edges. The question and the answer stirred with wonder. How could anything be so calm, so untouched? He whispered, not aloud, but into the folds of wind. Not words, but feelings, delicate, tangled, like threads without spools. And as he did, mistletoe leaves trembled in the shadowed parts of the grove, not with warning, but with recognition. For in this sacred hush, even the plants heard without fear. Loki did not linger. He was a guest even in his own shapes. He departed like a sigh, his feathers brushing the air with a quiet rhythm. Yet the grove kept his hum, echoing it in the rustle of leaves, in the slow bloom of mistletoe berries like pearls. Later that evening, Höðr sat by the edge of the same grove, his hands wrapped around a piece of carved driftwood. He tilted his head as if hearing something far away, not a voice, but a vibration. Baldr sat beside him, humming softly. Their shoulders touched, and the mist around them fell still. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The sky turned lilac, the grove listened. In this silence, even the presence of Loki, fluttering, thoughtful, far from mischief, felt like part of the music. Not discordant, but distant, curious, half asleep. And so the raven's path stitched itself into the evening, into the hush of the trees, into the breath of gods who felt no fear, only the drift of time moving gently past their fingertips. The sky, pale and endless, carried the whisper of wings. Long after they were gone, like a thought remembered just before sleep returns. In a secluded grove, just beyond the hush of Breidablik, there stood a single mistletoe tree, or perhaps it was not quite a tree at all. It grew like a dream half remembered, suspended from the limbs of another, never touching the soil directly. Its stems were thin as breath, curling in pale arcs, its berries soft as milk glass and glowing faintly in the dusk. No one tended this grove. It was not a place of ceremony, nor did it carry the weight of memory. It simply was a cradle of quiet, watched only by drowsy sparrows and drifting motes of light. The air here hung in a timeless stillness, cool and fragrant, as though every moment lay under layers of velvet. This was not a grove of forgetting. It was a place where things slept. Dreams drifted between branches like slow river currents. Thoughts too light to be held settled on leaves for a time before vanishing. The mistletoe in its gentleness absorbed it all, not knowing, not judging, only holding. One morning, a soft breeze rustled through the grove, and a single mistletoe stem, longer than the rest, loosened itself and fell, not sharply, but like a snowflake, slow and silent. It landed atop a bed of moss, where it lay, unnoticed, as a silver spider spun a web nearby and dew-kissed its curve. HR found it hours later. The blind god, with steps trained by sound and stillness, wandered alone in thought. He did not seek anything. He only moved to where the air cooled softer. And when he stepped into the grove, the wind hushed. The mist thickened just enough to feel like an embrace, and the stem of mistletoe brushed against his foot. He knelt without knowing why, fingers brushing the twig. It was light, lighter than breath, and smooth beneath his hand. He turned it slowly, feeling its cool curve, its gentle shape. There was no sharpness, no burden, just stillness. He tucked it into his belt, thinking nothing, only cradling the calm it brought. Elsewhere, Baldr wandered the edge of the same forest, his hands trailing through tall grass, his eyes half closed. He paused near the glade, sensing not danger, but a quiet deeper than usual, a stillness within stillness. He stood a while, letting the light press gently through the trees, letting it warm his skin. Then he turned away, smiling faintly, unaware that the grove behind him now remembered him in silence. Time passed, not in days or seasons, but in shadows that lengthened slightly, then retracted, in the soft drift of petals, in the way the mistletoe berries turned from pearl white to pale gold, so slowly that none could say when it began. At the foot of the grove, the mist thickened one afternoon, and in it stood a shape, not firm, not heavy, but a figure traced in glimmers. It bent low, fingertips brushing the moss. It left behind a thread of silence, a subtle fold in the world. Where it touched the air, cooled with memory. But there was no noise, no shudder, no cry. The mistletoe slept on, dreaming of slow rains and humming winds, of times when nothing happened but the turning of leaves. And in Breidablik, Baldr laughed with his friends, played games with stones and rings and carved toys gifted by the Vonia. They threw light-hearted darts of straw, of hollow reed, of soft curved wood, each one greeted with gentle cheers and fond smiles. HR joined when he could, sitting quietly to one side, listening to the rhythm of voices and the sound of laughter moving like wind chimes across stone. No one noticed the twig of mistletoe tucked near HI's sash. It made no sound. It gave no glint. It rested, as it always had, weightless, forgotten, not because it was hidden, but because it had never asked to be seen. And so the grove slept on, and the games continued, and mistletoe dreamed in its hush of light, of breath, of things that would never need to wake. In the grove, a dewdrop slid from one leaf to another and fell soundlessly into a bed of moss, where it vanished like a sigh. When the wind shifted gently through Asgard, carrying a hush deeper than silence. A ship was prepared, not out of urgency, but from love. Its planks were carved from the wood of candlebark trees, pale and polished until they gleamed like moonlight on still water. No nails held it together, only threads of flax and silver, woven with lullabies by hands that trembled not with sorrow but reverence. Baldr's body, untouched by harm, rested upon a bed of soft spun linen. His eyes were closed as if in sleep, his brow serene, and his lips curved faintly in a dream's embrace. He looked not like one lost, but like one returned to something vast and gentle. Around him were laid gifts, not treasures or tokens of grandeur, but quiet offerings. A carved stone from Thor, polished smooth, a braid of light blue thread from Freya, a locket of cloud feathers from Frigg, which he had gathered on a spring morning long ago. The gods stood along the shore, not in rows, not in formality, but scattered like stones in a stream, close but apart, each wrapped in stillness. None wept, no cries broke the air, only the sound of waves curling around the hull and the low chant of the wind threading through the pine. A silent fire lit at the bow shimmered golden white, not to consume, but to warm. It sent a light upward, soft, flickering like the breath of a sleeping world. The ship, light as driftwood, began to move. The waters opened not with splash, but with surrender, letting it pass like a memory returning home. As it drifted, the sky above deepened into pearl grey, the color of gentle transitions. Clouds formed shapes that evoked old tales of meadows, without horizon, of deer that danced among stars, of bridges made of song. And ahead, far beyond what the eye could see, lay the hidden field where Hel wove her dreams. Hel's realm, so often misunderstood, was not dark. It was dim in the way twilight is dim, a softness, a pause. Its meadows rolled endlessly, blanketed in pale moss. Its rivers moved slow and wide, and the air smelled of cedar, lavender, and stories almost told. There Baldr would rest, not in silence, but in music so subtle it could only be heard in sleep. Hel herself, half pale and half gold, would welcome him not as ruler, but as one who understands how deeply things can rest. On the ship, a single moth danced near Baldr's brow, its wings dusted with gold. It fluttered briefly before settling beside his hand, and there it stayed, unmoving as though guarding the peace. No gods followed the ship, none needed to. The journey was not of distance but of quiet. The wake it left shimmered like silk beneath the moonlight. When the vessel passed beyond sight, even the breeze hesitated before continuing its path. Later, long after, Frigg sat alone by the shore. She traced circles in the sand with one finger. The water lapped near her feet. She did not speak, nor summon, nor reach. She only listened to the stillness, to the echo of oars that had never dipped, to the distant hum of meadows now welcoming her son. In the high grasses behind her, tiny lights blinked, not stars, not fireflies, but soft lanterns made of memory. They hovered for a while, then gently drifted upward, dissolving as they reached the clouds. And in that wide hush, something deepened, not loss, not absence, but presence spread wide and calm. The sea, mirror still once more, cupped the last glimmer of the ship's flame, carrying it beyond sound, beyond sight, into a meadow where everything soft begins again. A linden tree stood at the far edge of Breidablik's garden, its canopy wide and low, shaped by time and stillness. Beneath its shade sat Hr, the god whose eyes did not see, but whose presence listened more deeply than most. He sat cross-legged upon a cushion of moss, his head tilted slightly as though catching the distant thread of a forgotten melody. His hands moved slowly, not in search, but in memory. One palm rested over his heart, the other traced shapes in the air, curves, loops, the form of feathers perhaps, or the trail of drifting petals. Around him, the linden leaves fluttered softly, releasing a perfume so faint it could only be noticed when all else was silent. The air was warm, but not heavy. It swayed gently, as though the grove itself breathed in long, slow cycles. HR inhaled with it, and in the quiet that followed, he remembered. Not in words, not in images, but in sensations. The feel of Baldr's laugh brushing his skin, the echo of soft footsteps beside his own. The way the garden hummed slightly more when his brother was near. These memories did not carry sorrow. They were woven with stillness, like wool softened by endless water. He reached into his sash and withdrew a slender twig. The mistletoe, it was light, unchanged, and now warm from the heat of his side. He turned it over in his hands without fear, tracing its smoothness, its silence. It did not hum or glimmer, it merely was. Baldr's presence, even in absence, lingered like the scent of blooming herbs long after harvest. HR could feel it in the way the wind curved around the tree. He could hear it in the small rustle of grass far away, in the way the brook now ran just slightly slower, as if listening. In the grove, he pressed the mistletoe gently to the earth, not as a gesture of farewell nor ritual, but simply because he felt it belonged there. The soil received it without resistance. The twig settled onto the moss and remained unnoticed by all but the breeze. As the day passed, shadows stretched long and languid, like a cat dozing in a patch of sun. HR leaned against the tree, his head tilted back, eyes closed, body open to the warmth above. He did not sleep, but drifted, somewhere between thought and sensation, between memory and breath. And within that drift, a sound emerged, faint and clear. A single tone, like a bell struck gently underwater. It rang only once, but it folded itself through the grove, and everything stilled. To receive it, HR smiled, a small, barely there motion of the mouth. He did not need to know what the sound meant. He did not seek it. It had arrived like so many other things in his life, quiet, unannounced, and complete. Later, the gods came in pairs, walking the garden in slow conversation. They passed the linden tree, sometimes pausing, sometimes not. But all who passed noticed the way the leaves, they curled inward slightly, as if embracing an invisible warmth. No one disturbed HR. They let him remain, his silence an offering, his stillness a prayer without words. And far beyond, in a meadow that touched no horizon, Baldr dreamed, not alone, not lost, but gently carried by a wind that had once passed through the linden leaves and now curved over fields soft with dusk. Above the grove, the sky softened its color again, neither blue nor gray, but something in between, like a held breath just before sleep. The fields beyond Asgard's edge, where the light does not shine but simply lingers, swayed with tall, silver grasses. These grasses made no sound when touched by the wind. They only bent slowly, as though bowing in welcome to those who walked the quiet paths between stars. It was here that the gods came, not all at once, not in ceremony, but in pairs, in trios, alone, their steps slow, their voices hushed by the hush itself. These fields were not fields of ending. They were places of remembering, where the air tasted faintly of sweet stone fruit, and something older still, like rain that had never fallen but always waited. Baldr's laughter, gentle and low, moved through the grass like a melody recalled. In a dream, it did not echo, it did not fade. It simply lived, around and between the blades, along the shallow brook that circled the field like a ribbon, across the wind that drifted over everything like a second breath. Frigg and Odin walked side by side beneath a willow that had grown from no seed, only silence. Frigg reached out and plucked a single thread of light from the air, winding it around her finger before releasing it. It floated away and folded into the clouds above. Nearby, Freya knelt to touch the soil, then smiled without speaking. From beneath her palm, small blue flowers emerged, soft-lipped and drowsy, their petals slow to open. She whispered to them, not words but a tone, something like a lullaby, and they leaned toward her, content. Thor stood at the far edge, gazing not into the distance but into the sway of the grass. He held no weapon, wore no armor. His hands were open, and his eyes reflected the sky, not in search, but in surrender. A sparrow landed near his boot. He did not move. After a moment, it flew upward and disappeared into the clouds, which drifted lower, like pillows inviting the sky to sleep. Even Loki came. He did not hide, did not shift shape. He walked with measured steps, and where he passed, the silver grass trembled slightly before settling. He paused where the brook bent close, kneeling to place a small object in the water, a braid of golden thread. He watched it drift away, carried gently around the field's curve, and then vanished behind a hill that no one had ever climbed. At the center of the field, where the wind slowed and the air thickened with calm, Baldr sat. He did not rise, did not call, he only smiled, eyes half closed, one hand trailing along the grass beside him. He had not changed, though the world around him had softened. The meadow had welcomed him as its own, not as visitor, but as part of its breath. Those who approached did not speak, they only sat near him, one by one. Some lay down beside him, arms behind their heads, watching clouds that shifted slowly into shapes of deer, feathers, sleeping wolves. Others sat cross-legged in the grass, eyes closed, listening. And as more gathered, the meadow did not grow crowded, it expanded. With every presence, the field widened, the sky lowered, and the air grew sweeter. The laughter of Baldr no longer came from one direction. It came from everywhere, from stone, from water, from leaf. In this place, there were no memories of departure, only the ongoing presence of what had always been gentle, always been whole. No one asked when they would leave. No one marked the time. The light remained steady, not bright, not fading, simply held. Above, the clouds turned pale gold and then silver, then became the sky itself, and in the soft hush of that silver field, where time lay curled like a sleeping fawn, all things continued in warmth, and nothing ever asked to end. Now you rest beneath the linden's shade too. You feel the hush that moves between stars, the breath of silver grasses leaning close to listen. The quiet presence of Baldr lingers in the warmth that surrounds you, not in story, not in shape, but in a calm that asks for nothing. You lie back in the meadow's embrace, the sky soft as linen above. Time drifts without edge. The wind brushes your cheek, not as movement, but as memory. There is nothing to remember, nothing to decide, only breath, only stillness, only light. And in that endless hush, you let go, not into dark, but into a peace that glows like petals opening, like laughter held gently in the air. Sleep now. Baldr is near. The sky folds over you like a quiet song, and the field carries you deeper into rest.